Welcome to the Disrupt Your Career podcast, brought to you by Claire Harbour
and Antoine Tirard. We're passionate about helping everyone find fulfillment in their work life.
We believe that big, messy, uncharted career changes are inevitable, and it's up to you to decide.
Will you take control and disrupt, or allow yourself to be disrupted?
We wrote the book about it, and now we share here our conversations with other thinkers in this crucial area.
Settle down and get ready to listen to this dose of wisdom.
So on this episode of the Disrupt Your Career podcast, I'm really happy to be welcoming Connelly Taaffe. She's a clinical associate professor at the Kellogg School of Management, where she teaches personal leadership insights and is the director of women's leadership programming. Prior to her academic career, Ellen spent 25 years with companies including PepsiCo, Royal Caribbean, and Whirlpool in top brand management positions. Ellen serves as an independent board director and also runs a leadership advisory, consulting, speaking, and coaching business. And she's a TEDx speaker. She's here today as she's just about to be publishing a book, The Mirrored Door, which is aimed at all female leaders. Ellen, welcome.
Hello, Claire. I'm so glad to be here and join you. Look forward to our conversation.
Wonderful. Let's start, as we always do, with your career journey. You've been through several pretty major pivots in your career, starting in brand management in FMCG, then consulting to a range of consumer-facing clients, and more recently, in a host of roles which pull on all your wisdom and strengths, including coaching, advising, speaking, and writing. Please do tell us how this extraordinary career unfolded. Was it by design or through serendipity? And what have been your key moments of pride, as well as the greatest challenges you've faced?
Well, I would say that it's a combination of those things. I would say in the earlier part of my career, it was more by design and my own interests. I actually started in sales and moved into brand management. At the time at PepsiCo, or a division of PepsiCo called Quaker Oats, that was a hard thing to do. I didn't have my MBA yet, but I did have a lot of sales experience and sales management experience. So made that move. After I had been through a lot of positions in 2 decades at PepsiCo, I moved across industries, which was doing the same thing, but across, going from, the next new snack to developing a cruise ship and restaurants, pretty large pivot of content, applying the strategies and things like that. And so I'm very proud of being able to successfully, build that brand management career and then take it across categories. Joining a board was also something I had not thought of until I saw a woman retire and say she was going to serve on boards. And I thought, oh, you can do that? One day I want to do that. And I guess the serendipity comes in that when I was at Whirlpool, I identified on one of these "what are your future goal" kinds of forms that I want to be on a board one day. I was a SVP of brands then, and a couple of years later, a board that was looking for a woman who had brand management and consumer packaged goods experience. They called around to their network, and the head of HR from Whirlpool said, "Why don't you think about Taaffe?" So that was that kind of serendipity of just connection that led to that board. In a future board, I had written an article about making career pivots late in life, and that led to another board where someone read the article. So sometimes it's these things that we don't even plan for that I think of as serendipity. And after my corporate career, I ran a boutique consulting firm where we did market research and brand and product strategy. And when that ended, I joined another board, decided I wanted to be a coach, and found that I was a bit bored and not ready to leave working in a full-time position. And I interviewed at Kellogg, or rather I was starting to get recruited to interview at Kellogg for the CMO job. And I was not sure I wanted it, but the day that I was there having lunch with someone I knew that worked at Kellogg, she said, the dean just announced a women's leadership initiative. And that sounds like kind of what you're all about, because I started to speak on panels about getting on boards and getting more women on and diverse candidates on boards. And I said, can I get that job description? And so I pulled out of the thing that I was sort of more naturally equipped for, I guess I would say, and went for the thing that I was more passionate about. And I ended up, it was a couple months process, but I ended up getting the job. And they put me on the faculty, the clinical or practitioner faculty. And I ended up eventually teaching a leadership course and running the women's leadership program. I would never have written this book had I not done that. So, a mix of design and serendipity.
Beautiful. And what I'm hearing is that what you're describing as serendipity is probably only partially so, because you did actually manifest the desire for all the things that eventually showed up and displayed that curiosity and agility that allowed them to happen. But that raises a much bigger philosophical question, which we're not going to tackle today. But thank you for sharing. What a wonderful story. So thinking back, you had this massive grounding in brand management and learned a lot along the way, especially as you had made that privileged move from sales into brand management. In fact, first of all, before we go into the lessons, I'd love to know, there will be many listeners who are thinking about this same question. How can I make that pivot from a sales role to a marketing role of some kind? If you had to give them 5 spicy tips, just quickly off the cuff, what would you tell those people to be thinking about and doing?
Get to know what brand management is. I was the sales liaison, build that network and get their support. Some of them would invite me to focus groups. I was really understanding what that was. I would say, identify your interests to your boss. That worked. They knew of my interest, but I also then identified it to my boss's boss. I would say my 5th one is leverage someone who can hire you in, build a relationship with someone who was sort of a mentor. And when she tried to bring me in, the person in my own division said, oh, wait a minute, she wants brand. I'll make that happen. So I made it happen within one company. So I don't know if they're spicy, but those are my tips.
Well, they're certainly fast and sizzling. Wonderful. They're great. Really useful. Now then, let's think about the lessons you learned from working in brand management for so long, particularly those that you find still serve you today.
One of my bosses told me that I was the most empathetic brand leader that he had seen. At the time, I wasn't sure if that was a compliment. I think I learned it really was. I worked for a company and it really fit me to be so invested in the consumer. And I think that plays out for me, whether I went into like B2B, where I was very invested in trying to understand the insights about the customer. I feel that way about the students that I teach. And I feel that way just even in developing my book, The Reader Journey. So we're all used to consumer or customer journey. And I think that takes a lot of empathy and understanding how your products or services are used and how you can play a role in that with your brand communication, with what's in your product, and how you treat that end consumer like in a 360-degree way, like whether that's, a service call or any way that you touch the consumer. And so that core thing still stays with me with what I do now, even from a board perspective. On 2 of my boards are relatively new CEOs, and I'm kind of the one who I was maybe hired in for my brand manager part of me, but I also am kind of like the leadership development and governance person. And so I can't say I'm the CEO's coach, but I know a lot about this area, but I'm very empathetic to what a new CEO is going through in managing a board. A lot of hard work there.
Fantastic. That's great. What initially tempted you away from the big corporate world, whether being inside it or consulting to it, and into coaching, academia, and writing? You've made these many changes, some of which are pretty big, but there are always struggles and challenges associated with such moves. How have you managed those struggles, and how did you turn them into thriving?
I went from 25 years in corporate America to 5 years in this, small consulting firm. And that was really probably the bigger pivot, I would say, to go from household brand names to even around your identity of who you work for to a small company. They say, who do you work for again? Smith Delmer Associates, not a known entity. And I would always say we're the best kept secret that needs to get our word out, but it was still a small company. So there was a bit of my identity tied to these big companies and then going into a small company. I would also say every change I made, it was such a bigger impact. So even when are we going to buy everyone iPads was a bigger decision in a small company than it is in a big company with much larger budgets. And then, as I left that organization and the owners ended up selling it, what I had found in that is that I was helping our customers deliver bad news to senior level people. And so I was playing this counsel and almost coaching role for our clients when they got research back that said their product is not good and they shouldn't invest all this money. I found myself in this frequently in a coaching kind of role too. And then I also ended up interviewing for a CEO job. It was not the right fit given what I learned about the company, and they were not the right fit for me too. But the feedback I got from the recruiter is that they asked you about every job you ever had in basically 30 years. And every time you led with people results, not business results. And my initial reaction was, gosh, this is frustrating. I've had turnarounds and growth and, I've done all these things. But the reality is what they saw in me was true, that I really do believe that people are what drives the results. So those were the things that were sort of top of mind for me. And that really led me into, I want to be a coach and do the board work and coach. And then I felt like to be a coach, it was hard. I loved the coaching, not the business development of coaching. And I missed being part of something bigger, which I do feel that as a board director, but I worked for so long, and loved the companies I worked for. So when the Kellogg opportunity came up, I remembered how much I loved being at Kellogg, getting my MBA. And what I wasn't sure about was academia. And then, you get in, and in all of these moves, you become the beginner again. And that's really hard when you've been at a point where you've really mastered things and people went to you to have all the answers. And then you go in and you're the beginner. I felt like I kind of held back too much, thinking I need to respect, the tenured faculty and all the people who have so much experience. I worked for someone who was just so gracious and generous in teaching me. I became part of the teaching team for this really popular class where I was able to observe other teachers for, a couple quarters. And then also people were very generous in sharing how they do things so that I could learn how I would do things and, put my own stamp on the class. So that really helped. But for me, wanting to show up perfect and have all the answers when I couldn't possibly in these new situations was probably one of the harder things, as well as that evolving identity.
Great lesson. Thank you. Let's talk a bit more about beginners. Let's talk about early career professionals who are looking to make a start in their careers. What sort of advice do you have for them?
I think my biggest advice is go as big and bold as you can early on so that you have options later. By options, I mean, you can go in different career directions if you get a solid base on things. When life gets more complicated, whether that is caregiving of children or parents or siblings, or you worked enough and the acceleration of your career isn't as steep and it sort of plateaus, sometimes that's a challenging time and you want to have, many more other activities in your life too. It's kind of counter to some of the advice of, travel the world in your 20s or that kind of thing. I say go big, so that you can really have a lot It gives you more choices. I also think getting any kind of financial experience, so you understand, I'm in the world of business, but so you understand how businesses work, how business makes money or serves their customer, people management experience, strategy experience. Those are all really, really important things. And the last thing I would say is run your own race, like figure out who you are, what are your strengths and values, what can you be really good at and make a living from. And that's where I have multiple times in my career had coaches. And part of my class is helping people to see who they are, who they want to be, and how do you get there. But it's so often, like for me early on, other people told me, oh, you'd be so good at sales. And I was good. It was more of a heavier lift. And then when I moved into brand management, it just flowed. So the more you can find what works for you, you're helped by when other people think you could be good at something too.
Wonderful. I love the sound of that little voice of intuition that was telling you all along. I'd also point out that it may not be a black and white thing of go travel or go big. You just might be able to go travel and go big. I love to think of the yes and answers to these things. And that seems like a really important one. But I'm absolutely with you.
I like that. I like your advice. I might have to borrow that.
All right. Let's talk about your book, The Mirrored Door. What was your motivation to write it, and what need are you trying to address with the book? And if you can share something about the process for your writing, as it was your first book, I think, then we'd love to hear.
It started when I was new at Kellogg. I was hired in to run the women's leadership program. And at my very first orientation, where there's probably 600 people in a big auditorium, there was a female CEO who shared her career story, her ups and downs. And when she opened it up for questions, all the hands that shot up asking questions were all from the men in the class, not one from the women. And there were probably about 200 of them in the room. And I was shocked because basically you have to be off the chart smart to get into this school and have had quite a lot of accomplishments in your 20s. These are people who are late 20s. It was a full-time 1Y program. I was puzzled because I found them to be amazing. They just weren't in that auditorium. I dug into a lot of the research and saw there's this holding back that happens, and holding back for the perfect question or the perfect me to go after, some of the opportunities that are out there. And also seeing in myself, me holding back from speaking up. I'm on a new board and I think, oh, I don't know this industry yet. I better hold back. So there's this dynamic. There's a lot of research on, men going for 6 of 10 of the criteria in a job posting, and women wait for all 10, and a host of more recent research too that holds it back. And, I developed this metaphor of the mirror door, which is this moment that many women encounter where we reflect inward at opportunity and think we're not ready or worthy to move forward into action, and not realizing that the growth is on the other side of taking action. But we busy ourselves doing a lot of things like perfecting and pleasing and, fitting in, and things that have worked before, but they have an underbelly and underside of it too. I mentioned the mirror door in a TEDx talk that I gave. It was really a line in there about like stepping into taking ownership of your career and life. And after the talk, I had a lot of people in the audience come up to me and say, the mirror door, like that hit me. And so that really became sort of the centerpiece and sort of shifted the writing too.
Let's talk just a little bit about your process for writing. You came out of a career that had nothing to do with multiple tens, if not hundreds of thousands of words. Tell us about how you made it happen.
It started with getting feedback that I have all this experience and I'm not sharing it. So someone gave me that feedback along with a lot of positives. And that sort of set me on a mission of like, they did hire me for all my experience. I need to start to share that. I loved consumer insights. So I love finding other people's research and the dot connecting. I'm not a researcher, but I am a dot connector, and seeing how the insights come together. So that was part of it. And I started to get help and training through things like I became a Northwestern Fellow at the op-ed project, which was learning to write op-eds. And that was pretty pivotal. There was a great quote in that was, if you say things of consequence, there can be consequences, but the alternative is to be consequential. So that's close to the quote, but this
definitely very clear.
Yeah, it was inspiring to me of like, I'm late in my career. I'm here to make a difference. I don't want to be inconsequential. So that was another piece. Getting ready for the TEDx talk, I joined a group called Heroic Public Speaking and got paired with a writing coach. And then I took her book workshop. So her name is AJ Harper. And that was in winter of 2020. So we started the class virtually. It was a virtual class, and then it became a community that was such a touch point for me during the pandemic. And we wrote together every morning. And so I learned how to put stories, how to communicate teaching points and messages, which were part of what I was learning at Kellogg, but then also to be able to do that in a way that would, serve the reader in an engaging way. So attach it to stories and back it up with research. I learned the craft and I had the community.
That community, that tribe, is so, so important. Let's talk a little bit more then about what exactly a mirrored door is. We've obviously all heard about glass ceilings. You've mentioned that it sort of came up as you were speaking. If you were to boil down the main ideas of the book, what would they be?
We may be locked out and are locked out by systemic issues and biases, but we may also be locking ourselves in place by this reflection that is truly distorted most of the time, thinking that we're not ready. Some of it stems from ingrained lessons learned as kids in school or families. Girls so often are really taught, even in their friendships, to be cooperative, don't stand out, don't rock the boat, and be all about connection. So a lot of really good things too. Boys, the research shows, have much more of a one-upmanship kind of competitive friendships that end up teaching them to go for things before you really know how to do them. That enables them to take some chances to put an opinion out there that they're not certain about. And so these things stay with us in the workplace, which already has some challenges in it. It keeps us holding back. I identified these 5 different areas that drive our success, but also have a peril to them. And they're preparing for perfection, eagerly pleasing, fitting the mold, working pedal to the metal, and patiently performing, awaiting being noticed. And they're all things that make us a great person to work with or oversee, but they also can hold us back if we don't evolve and learn how to prioritize work, delegate, decide with uncertainty, set boundaries, a whole host of sort of different things, or break the mold of what was at the company before. So I offer ways to get to identify when you might be, working against yourself too, and to tap into your courage to take action.
Fantastic. I'd love to pick on one particular example. What would you recommend to someone who's preparing for perfection or too eager to please, someone who's trying to fit in while performing and waiting to be noticed?
Those are 4 of the 5. So I'll
give ourselves a big challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. In all of these, I see myself in all of them at different times in my career. So it's not a personality test or anything like that. Mm-hmm. I'll just start with preparing for perfection. In that case, recognize the power of that is delivering excellence and growing to be dependent upon for that. The thing to become aware of, if that is something that resonates with you, is that as expectations rise, we don't have the time to prepare like we once did. And that's the perfectionist generally spends a lot of time preparing, over preparing even. And then when they rise in an organization, as well as expectations of them, because they've been in the company or the role for a while, as they rise, you got to move faster and you got to decide without all that preparation and count on that you understand how to think about this and decide to the best of your ability. And so it's about working with your manager and to prioritize the work. So often this is the A+ student who delivers everything as an A+, and just even working with your manager, taking all your work and dividing it across of like, what are the things that truly need A+ effort, that need to be all the bells and whistles perfectly done? And what are the things that like, I can come in with a rough draft, or maybe I don't even do this. So that's sort of one part of that prioritization and dimensionalizing where you place your effort. And it takes practice because a perfectionist doesn't want to come in with a rough draft. So I say like little small steps that get you there, but it's also learning about delegation and decision making. So it's the conversations around what is the risk here, and how do you attach effort to risk too? Like how much effort given the risk here as well. So I go through in each one of these, what's the power, what's the pitfall, what's the perception that could happen, both from others, but also with yourself. So there's also, for a perfectionist, high amount of stress. The stress in, I don't want to mess up. And then what's the pivot? What's the action that you take in small steps to practice? I can go on into the others if you want, or you asked for one example.
Let's pick just one. Let's pick the waiting to be noticed one.
So in this case, someone who is waiting to be noticed is also a manager's dream because they're not breathing down their neck to get promoted, and they do a great job. But what happens is over time, the squeaky wheel sometimes gets the grease. And also, you can become this patient, mature person who's playing the long game to then be the person that's kind of easy to say no to from a manager perspective. And over time, it's also really frustrating. Like, why am I getting passed over? I've done everything right, at least according to my rules. And so there's really a dig into what is your view of self-promotion. And there's a real opportunity to reframe it to collaborative career planning. But so often there is someone who is in this mode, has a rule around, I don't want to be a braggart to talk about all of what I've accomplished, or I don't want to be seen as pushy, or whatever that is. So you kind of have to dive into what holds you back from saying what you want or sharing your accomplishments, when those are part of career planning. Your manager is responsible for your development as well. So I have a framework that I take students and clients through that's in the book called SIGN. And the idea is like, you got to show a sign. You might need to send up a flare if they don't know what you want. But it's, S is for stakes. What's at stake here for you staying as you are, or what's at stake for the career you want? What's your intention? Because it's really setting you up for an initial conversation where you're going to share more of this. What's your intention and the mindset that you want to go into? G is for what's your goal of this meeting, and what's your longer term goal? And the N is for negotiables. We think that is, usually salary and bonus and vacation and benefits, but it's so much more. So if in reality you're, a year away from a promotion, there might be other things, whether they're project assignment or oversight, direct report responsibility, or some kind of training or coaching that you could also negotiate for, that make you feel like you can be a little more patient, but you're also getting provided for also on your way to the thing that you want to have in your career. So I hope that helps.
Oh, it's wonderful. Yes. And of course, we want our audience to buy your book, but it's fantastic to be dipping in like this and hearing such strong examples. Let's turn around a little bit. What can all leaders do, if they so choose, to help open or even remove the mirrored door. And if you have any great case studies or examples around this, it would be wonderful to share it.
I think one of the best things to do is to be vulnerable yourself. As a leader, talking about your own transition from perhaps somebody who viewed self-promotion in that last example, as icky or something like that, like I am not that person, to I learned this is how it works. No one knows, what you really want. They don't magically know. So another thing for a manager is to know what your people want and be as clear as you can with feedback. I think it's hard to give feedback. It's certainly hard to get it too, but tapping into your courage to say what needs to be said, but also tapping into your care. I'm assuming you care about the company, the team, and your direct reports' goals too. And so with that in mind, if you can identify what you observe and can give feedback and where someone is relative to expectations of the amount of time in the role in line with what they want in their career. I would say, as I was learning, early on in my career, I was trying to get to be a VP in brand. And I was told by my boss, the senior management doesn't think you're tough enough. And he said, I know you are because I see you every day. But it was hard to hear. I was so frustrated by that. But we worked together then on here's how I can approach some of these meetings that there were only few a year to have. But if I went in smiley and warm, they're going to think of me in one way. Position your people in ways that showcase who they are in a more full way, especially when senior management only sees people. It's only a snapshot in time. But when that happened with that feedback, my manager, he was president of our division, he also shared his own evolution of his career. And, I just felt like he was on my side. He was being a coach to me to help me to get to what I wanted and to help me to show up in a way that I didn't have to be inauthentic. It was just showing more of who I am. So it was really one of the most valuable experiences in my career.
Fantastic. Lucky you to have had that leader in the end. Well, the book gets published next week. My usual last question is, what are your most exciting projects for the rest of the year? I kind of know the answer, but why don't you share with us what's in store exactly?
Well, it's kind of already started. I had a virtual book reading last night. I have a Kellogg Alumni Association event. So this is my third in-person event. So next week I'm in Washington, D.C. So I'm doing sort of a mix of virtual and in-person events. Some of them are fireside chats and some are webinars where I dive deeper, where I'm really kind of teaching or presenting. Yeah, you can learn more about them on my LinkedIn too.
We will absolutely be sharing all relevant links.
I know it's going to be a crazy time through the next few months, but I also look at the book launch as a year-long thing, because my hope is that this is a sustainable book for women looking to build their leadership and their allies.
Well, having read from cover to cover the pre-publication version that you sent me, then I can say that certainly it resonated a great deal with me, even if I think I was probably born professionally a boy and therefore never saw the mirrored door. But hey, it was still very interesting and insightful, and 99% of my female clients will certainly benefit from this. And I know that our readers will, without any doubt at all. So Ellen, I want to thank you for sharing and spending this time with me today. It's been beautiful, inspiring, insightful, and I know that the audience is going to love it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Claire. I really enjoyed talking with you.
We hope you enjoyed hearing from this month's guest as much as we did.
Do go and check out our work on disrupt-your-career.com and come back soon. Thank you.